Okay, so once you have the vehicle up off the ground and you have the tire off, then you're going to have your rotor and your caliper here. Not quite as exposed as this, but you'll be able to get in there. So one of the first things you want to do is take off, there's like a little retainer clip here. This little wire clip, all it does is it keeps this thing tight in here so it doesn't rattle going down the road. They're easier to take off than they are to put on. So basically all you're going to do, basically it hooks in, it's got two hooks that kind of hook in these two holes here, and the rest of it, this little part here, the flat part, rests against here. So if I tilt it forward, and be careful because it might fly out when you snap it loose. So you're basically getting to where these parts come off the end there and getting tension off it. But it's kind of like a spring, so watch it, it could go flying like that. So this is what it looks like when it's off. These are the two little points that go into the holes here, and then these flat things go against there. So it's easier to take off than put on. Well, we'll get to that when we're done. So next step is to take the caliper off. So you got two bolts holding it in, one at the top, one at the bottom on the back side.
Show me.
Okay, so there's a bolt here. It's got like a little boot around it, a little rubber boot, this rubber piece. So you can't see it, but there's a bolt there and there's a bolt down there. And this bolt uses, you either need an Allen key, like a hex key, which kind of looks like this on the end, or you need a socket that's that same shape as an Allen wrench. So this particular size is 7mm. So all I do is I take it, put it in here, right, get my ratchet on there, and make sure you're set to loosen. You're just gonna loosen this up. Take both bolts out. It might take a little while. Kind of long bolts, and you'll see the thread coming through the other side. You'll know kind of when you're past it. Now they also kind of stick in there a little bit. So even once you're loose and you think, wow, I'm just cranking on this forever and it's not coming out, it's because it won't just slide out. Sometimes it's stuck in there a little bit. What I usually do is I'll press down on it a little bit and then to keep tension on it, and then slide it backwards, and it should just slide out. It looks like that. Just a pin, a threaded pin, and on the end is where this goes in. Easy peasy, don't lose. There. And then we'll take the bottom one out.
What are you using now?
Same tool. Yep.
Where's the
So we're just taking the bottom one out, and it's covered with a little rubber boot. And we just crank on it a while till we think we got it all the way loose. And like I said, it's not like a regular bolt where when it comes out, you just comes loose in your hand. This boot that it slides into, the sleeve, kind of keeps it in there a little bit. So even once it's all the way out, you won't necessarily know it until you like figure you got it far enough, and then if you pull on it, it'll come out. Okay, now the caliper should be loose. Now you want to look at your rotor though. Hopefully you don't have to replace your rotor, but if your rotor if you let your pads get too low and you were metal on metal, you'll have a bunch of grooves cut in here. So if you're metal on metal, then you're going to have to replace this too. But
that looks like it needs a rotor, right?
Well, this one's rusted. It's actually okay. As long as your pads didn't run down, you can get by with just putting new pads on. But if you let your pads go metal to metal, you got to replace the rotor. Some people replace them regardless, but you can get by with
How
just
did you
the
get that
pads.
off?
You just kind of wiggled it out.
Okay.
So I kind of wedged this in. Basically, you're just sliding it out. It just pops off once those two bolts are out. So you don't want this to just dangle by the brake hose. So, I mean, if you had zip ties, you can zip tie it up, or you just want to set it like that. So like this, one brake pad pops in.
I didn't see what you did.
It's just these clips just hold it inside this cylinder. Okay. So this one's got a lot of meat left on it. It's It's very thick. This little line down the middle, that's kind of like your wear line. If it was gone and not visible anymore because it got all the way down to where that groove ends, and then you'd probably be getting close to metal on metal. But this one's like almost new, it looks like. And then the other one just kind of rests in here, right? So when you go to AutoZone or wherever and you get new brake pads, you'll get them in a box. And all you'll do is after you take these old ones off, you'll take the new ones. There's two different ones. One has nothing on the back, it's flat. The other one has these little clips. So the one that's just flat, that's the one that goes on this side, the one that faces outward. And all you'll do with the new one is you'll just take it, and you'll get it in here and you'll set it. It's got like little grooves here that kind of rest inside here. So you'll get it so it looks like, yep, nice and solid. This guy clips inside here, right inside this piston. This is your caliper piston. This pushes out. This is what makes your brakes work. When you hit the gas or when you hit the brake pedal, it actually pushes this thing out, and it's what makes your brakes kind of squeeze together on the rotor. But what's going to happen is if your pads have been worn down, so they're thinner, this piston is further out than it used to be when the pads were new. So if you were to try to just snap the new pad in there, it wouldn't fit. It has to get pushed backwards. So that's what the C-clamp is for. So the C-clamp looks like this. And all you do is you get it one side on this piston. It's like a little round piston here, the metal part, not the rubber boot, but the metal part. And you just kind of start tightening it.
Like a vise.
And you get it until... Now if you have the old pad, you can use that too. Like if the old pad was still in there, because you don't have to worry about damaging it because you're just throwing it away anywhere. You wouldn't want to do with the new one. But if you still had the old one sitting in here like this, you could just crank it with the pad on there still. Which sometimes that makes it easier because you don't have to get that little edge on the piston. You can just, and you would just turn it and you'll see it compressing. This piston is getting pushed in, right? And you would go all the way. You keep going and you'll kind of feel when it hits bottom. Like right now it's like, it don't feel like it wants to go anymore. That's as far as it goes. And then you back the C-clamp off, you remove it, you would pop off the bad pad, the old one. You would pop in the new pad, right? And you already have the new pad that you would have put down there. And then all you do is you make sure you don't twist this. You want to untwist it. Like if I were to try to keep rotating it this way, see how it binds? You don't want that. Make sure you got it twisted right where this guy is just nice and smooth. And then you just set this in here like this. And it'll seat in. And then all you got to do is these pins. Now usually when you buy the pads, they'll come with like some lubricant, some brake lubricant or grease, or at AutoZone they'll try to sell you the little pack of lubricant. You can get that, and what you would do is you would lubricate this. It makes it slide a little easier. So you can kind of take that brake lubricant and kind of go like this. They usually come in that little packet. It looks almost like a ketchup packet. You just squeeze a little on here, lube it up, slide it in through here. Now you got to make sure that it lines up because sometimes you got to kind of wiggle this a little bit to get it in the right spot until this thing goes in where it's supposed to. And then once you have it lined up, you can start tightening it. Alright, so that would be it. Once this is tightened in, you're good. Now if you end up in a situation where, whoops, my rotors are jacked because I went metal to metal, or they look like they need to be replaced because they got a lot of deep grooves in them, then what you would do is you'd have to do an extra step, which is replacing your rotor. Pretty easy on these cars. It does require one additional step though. These rotors just kind of...
Show her which one the rotors are again.
So the rotor is this big round thing here, right? So if the brake pads are off, this rotor could almost come off, except this guy's in the way, this little mount that the caliper mounts to, this has to come off. So on the back side, there's two bolts, a bolt here and a bolt there. And we'll check the size of it here in a second, and they're hard to move. They're big bolts, so it takes a little bit of force to get them to move. But you got to take these two bolts off, and then this piece comes off. Then this rotor just slides right off there. And all you would do is, if you had to buy a new rotor, you would then take the new rotor, you'd slide it on there, you'd bolt this thing back in, and then with your new pads, right, you would make sure you got the one new pad here that just rests into this, the other one that clips into the caliper, and you would just slide it on. Alright, and then the two bolts, that would go in here. We just get them lined up good. You can kind of look through here, you can see where they go. It goes through in threads. And then you tighten those two bolts up. Put your tire back on, and you're good to go. Now what you want to watch out for is don't get any, if you're using that grease, that oil, to lube up these pins here, don't get any on the brake surface. You can contaminate your brake pads. Don't get any dirt or grease on the face of your brake pads. If you do, you need to clean it off, preferably with a can of brake parts cleaner. So you might want to pick that up just to play it safe. It's usually just a couple dollars, but what you would do is you would just spray that brake parts cleaner on here. Make sure, wipe it with a clean paper towel or something. Make sure there's no dirt or grease especially, or oil. And then tire back on, tighten it up, lower the car. Now you'll notice, and probably once you do one side, and you get your tire down, go ahead and get in the car, pump your brakes a few times, because when you seated that caliper backwards to make room for the thicker new pads, there's usually a little gap in there, and it can force your brake fluid up through your reservoir. You don't want it to overflow. So usually once I get one side done and I get the tire down on the ground, I'll get in the car, I'll pump the brakes a few times until I feel the pressure, and then I know that I've got this thing seated good. And then you'll start on the second side. And then the same thing, before you go anywhere in the car, once you've got the brake pads replaced on the other side, you want to get in the car before you don't want to just try to take off. While you're still in park, pump the brake a few times, get that pressure up, get the brake pads nice and tight against the rotor, and then take it for a road test. That should be it. All right, so what we left out on the last one is the size. If you do have to take the caliper or the this little caliper mount out because you got to replace the rotor, if you have to do that, it's going to be an 18mm socket that fits back here. So bolt up here. Of course, this would be off already, and then the other bolt down there at the bottom. So those two bolts, but it's 18mm is the size socket you need. Now the other thing is this clip we took off in the beginning, and I said it'd be more difficult put it on than to take it off. So what we're going to do, there's a lot of different ways to do it. One way is you put one of these little pins that stick out into the bottom hole, and you put pressure against it, and then because we want one side in the hole, the other side against this back flat part. So this flat part kind of tucks behind here. So this bottom one I already got set. I got this in the hole right there. I had to push it all the way in. It's flush now, and see how it's gonna get this other one a little more difficult, but kind of get it to wiggle in a little bit and then pry back. See how this one's not quite making it in there. It wants to slip out. That's the hard part, just getting it to go in. Might have to maneuver it a little bit with a screwdriver or something. Try and get it to pry in, but I didn't want to go that time. Let me try just putting both the pins in. Okay, slide it back. Just try a couple different methods, but basically whatever works. There's going to be a little bit of tension on this. So if you have to, get a screwdriver in there. Whoops, it pops out. It's real, like I said, it's a lot harder to put it back in than it was to remove it. There, finally popped in. Just kind of get it, work it back and forth. But you want to make sure these two pins are seated in these holes, and these two things are laying back flush there. And that is it. For real.